The Bosnian War, hosted by Equal Brick. I'll make this brief. It's the first time I've ever shared this. I was in the British Army in 1995 in Bosnia towards the end of the Civil War. We used to use halfway swap points to exchange mail, rations, and ammunition. My first run, at night between the Tepas tunnel and Sepulveda, and we are just on a mountain road overlooking a small village. You could make out various lights in the homes. In the nearest one I remember seeing a nice vase in the warm glow of an upper window. It was so cold and looked so inviting. We swapped items and headed back. A couple of days later, I was tasked to go to the same point in the same day. To my complete shock, the village wasn't there. Well, some of the walls were all black, pointing out of the snow. I double-checked the grid reference and got another soldier to double-check. Sure enough, the arriving party also confirmed this was the same spot. There were no other villages within 10 miles anyway. I never mentioned it to anyone. Soldiers don't talk about such things until they leave. Edit. Thank you for your positive interaction on my experience. I really was going to take this up ASAP because I just thought it would get only negative feedback. I don't like sharing stuff about that place. And don't let me put you off there. The people are so friendly, so welcoming, and it's a beautiful country. Green Light in the Ocean, hosted by Rick the Screen. I'll give a little background. The type of ship I was on was a large US Navy ship. I won't tell you all which because personal info. The ship was also tall, so I was about 25 yards above the water. The distance from me to the front of the ship was about 30 yards. I was standing lookout on the port side of the ship. The day was January 19th, 2020, around 11 p.m. It was so cloudy, so no stars were out. The ship was about 20 to 30 miles off the coast of Florida/Georgia. End of background. Late at night, me and my watch partner in training were standing our final hour of watch for the night. I had been leaning on a stanchion-like thing when I had seen a pale green light in the water. I jumped up, pointing and saying, "Yo, what the fuck is that?" When my watch partner also saw it. A pale green light that was about 5-6 feet in diameter. It was a couple of yards away from the ship. At first I had thought it was a man overboard, but I was wrong when it started to outswim the ship underwater. It swam up and passed the ship to the starboard side. The light had cleared the distance in about 4 seconds, where it then dimmed and disappeared. My partner and I were dumbstruck, and we decided we wouldn't report it, because our command would think we were crazy. On my way out of the bridge later that night, I asked the lee helmsman if we had any speed changes. He said, "We have been cruising at 80 knots all watch." So if you all can tell me what it was, I'd much appreciate it. Or tell me your stories, so my partner and I are not alone in the crevice. Mom's Germany Story, posted by Jason the NPC 85. For a bit of a quick background. After my father left the military, he worked in aerospace and frequently had to visit different countries. My mother and him lived in Bitburg, Germany for a year or two. They lived in an old building next to the base. This happened before I was born, and my mom has told this story a few times as it was an experience that made her believe in ghosts. One evening, my mom was doing dishes. The kitchen had a door at the end that led downstairs to the ground level. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a man in uniform just outside the window. Thinking it was someone from the base looking for my dad, she opened the door to find no one standing there. She freaked out and called security. They arrived, and she described the man she briefly saw. One of the guys said, paraphrasing, "Oh, you saw him? Yes, he has been around here for quite some time." Then they went on to explain that this building that they were in had been remodeled from a part of a hospital that was active during World War II. My mom had seen the ghost of this German Nazi officer. Tales of Creatures, Gnomes, Tepas from rural Mexico by my great-grandmother and grandmother. Posted by JMMC_. Here are it. This is my first time using this website, and I created this account because I wanted to share a couple of stories that have been passed down in my family. So first, I'll give some background info. These were told to me by my great-grandmother, currently 90, and my grandmother and her sister. These take place many years back, when my great-grandmother was a teen, and when my grandmother and her sister were very young. These stories take place in rural Mexico. My family lived in a ranch back when there were barely any cities, just a couple of houses, meaning no electricity, communication, roads, or anything like that. Gnomes. So basically in the ranch that my family lived in, they lived right next to this river, and other houses next to the ranch also lived near this river since it provided many resources. My grandmother told me that these gnomes came from up the river and closer inland like many other creatures, which was completely uninhabited for hundreds and hundreds of years, which is why they believed these creatures were able to live there. These gnomes were about the size of a small child, and they were mischievous, but not evil. In fact, it was known around the village that these gnomes loved children and would always play with them. Over the years, this became normal, and for some reason, people just accepted that they were living and seeing tiny people all the time. Different times, I guess. My great-grandmother told me that she played with them when she was a child. And when she grew up and had my grandmother and her sisters, the gnomes were still around. These gnomes would enter houses at night to play with children, and one time they entered at night and gave gifts to my grandmother that was in her crib because she was recently born. When my great-grandmother woke up and saw the crib, there were multiple stones from the river surrounding the crib, and also some piles of dirt and other things from the river. People from around the village would have different stories of these gnomes. Sometimes they would get up on horses with someone was riding them, and even at night you could hear them in your roof, and you could also hear them laughing. I don't remember my grandmother telling me if they had names or anything. They just referred to them as duendes, so like gnomes / little people / goblins. When I asked what happened to them and where they are now, they told me that after some years and after the world started to change, then they just stopped appearing to them. Tepas. I will first tell you the story that they told me, and then I will describe it and talk about this. So basically, a relative of my grandmother that also lived near the ranch was walking next to the river at dawn because he was going to fish. As he was walking down the river, he sees a woman in the distance on the other side of the river. He described her as a beautiful woman with a perfect body, in a white dress and long black hair, but he could only see the back of her. As he got closer, he thought that it was someone that he knew, so he started shouting to say hello and calling out her name, but she was not responding. As he got closer and closer, she finally turned around, and when she did, he saw that her face was actually a human skull. This guy screamed and was so scared that he fainted and was later found unconscious. He was taken to a hospital and was treated, but for many weeks he had a fever and he was always scared. This thing had broken this man just by looking at him. And as the years passed, more and more people had experiences with these women, or as my family called them, Tepas. Some other people that lived around the ranch sometimes saw them walking upstream and sometimes in pairs, so the people believed that they also lived more inland, like the gnomes. After I heard this story, I found an article that described the exact same thing that my family told me. But as you can see, it has a different name. These are some of the stories that I've been told, and if I'm being honest, I don't know if I believe them or not. I personally never experienced or met any of these creatures, but I find it odd that other cultures and people around the world describe these creatures the exact same way, even though they did not have ways to communicate what they were seeing all around the world. Also, when my great-grandmother and grandmother told me these stories, I could tell from their eyes and the way they spoke that they were not lying, or at least they fully believed that they had seen them and that these creatures were real. My great-grandmother had some sort of supernatural powers. Posted by Nive Kiniko. I don't know what to flare this post, so please correct the flare if another one better suits it. I posted on this subreddit yesterday and got feedback, so I decided I'd tell a story of another paranormal experience I've had. My great-grandmother has some sort of supernatural powers. I've heard stories from family members. However, I've only directly experienced one thing she's done, or said, I guess. My mother always told me stories about how there were times when she wasn't allowed to go downstairs in her house. She has 12 brothers and sisters, and she's the oldest. She says there were times when her aunt would tell her to gather all of her siblings that were home and bring them upstairs because they had to do work. They, meaning my great aunt and my great grandmother. My great aunt always told my grandmother that they weren't allowed downstairs until they said they could. My grandmother told me this happened about 3 to 5 times a month, sometimes more. My grandmother was always confused because my great grandmother was a stay-at-home mom. Her husband was a construction worker, and some of my grandma's brothers worked. So it's safe to say she knew something suspicious was going on, because it didn't make sense that they'd be doing work downstairs. Eventually, one day this had happened, my grandmother decided to sneak downstairs and see what was really going on. She goes downstairs after telling her siblings to stay in the room they always stayed in. She opens the door and looks around the wall to the living room. For context, the living room is at the end of the apartment downstairs, and there is a wall to the left and right before you get in the hallway leading to the living room. I know this because it's the same house my grandma lives in to this day. Anyways, she peeks around the corner and sees my great-grandma reading a book to a woman, holding a necklace in the air. My great-aunt is holding the woman's hand and the woman is seizing. Seizing is the word my grandma used to describe what the woman was doing. She said she was shaking and making grunting noises. After she saw this, she got extremely scared and ran upstairs. She never went down and looked again. She also never told any of her siblings what she saw. Only people she's told are my mom, her daughter, and me. I know what an exorcism is, however, my grandma never used that word to describe what she saw, so take it as you will. Next story, quick but also odd. My mom's pet frog went missing one day. Literally, it was in the tank one day, and the next day, it was completely gone. 3 months later, my mom finds it in a ball of dust. It's all crusty and clearly not alive. She shows my great-grandma, and my great-grandma grabs it, puts it in the palm of her hand, and the frog jumps out of her hand. They had to give the frog away because after it went missing, they threw out the tank. I thought my mom was making a joke when she told me this, because it sounds so unbelievable. However, my grandma told me it happened as well. Finally, my experience. My great-grandma died when she was 98 or 99. I honestly forgot. Either way, when she died, she wasn't in a good mental state since she was so old. She wasn't terrible, however definitely not her former self. The months before she passed, she always told me she heard opera music. She'd tell me they're calling for me, and I can't keep them waiting. This startled me not only because it's creepy, but because I've literally only heard my great-grandma speak English to me when she'd say hello and goodbye. She was born in Puerto Rico and moved to the US with her kids and husband, however, never fully learned English. She'd tell me these things in perfect English. Anyways, she passed away and I've never had an odd experience involving her since she's passed. Like no weird dreams with her or anything. I practically live at my grandma's house where the exorcisms, or whatever you want to call it, happened, and I never hear or see anything odd. Only thing I hear sometimes are keys dangling, and that's very rare when I hear it.
Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, comment and subscribe for more videos.